Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Monday, February 2nd, 2026. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. In today's episode, we'll hear from Variety's Rebecca Rubin, who gives us a clear-eyed look at the weekend box office, which was pretty eventful. Melania surprised, Send Help led, and Iron Lung set a new bar for DIY creator-made titles at the multiplexes. But before we get to that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. The Grammy Awards last night were a pretty fantastic affair. It was the last airing of the Kudo cast on CBS after 54 years, and it did go out on a high note. There were unpredictable winners. Lauryn Hill leading the arena in a sing-along of Killing Me Softly in tribute to Roberta Flack was a moment to remember. The same was true for the Ozzy Osbourne tribute featuring Post Malone, Slash, Billie Joe Armstrong, and others. War Pigs was a great choice. And then it was an early morning call on the West Coast for those of us who cover Disney. The Mouse House unveiled earnings for the last 3 months of 2025. The numbers were solid. The studio side had strong traction thanks to Zootopia 2 and Avatar Fire and Ash burning up the box office. The Parks and Experiences segment was perky, if not off the charts. But investors were very mixed in their response, sending the stock down more than 5% in early trading this morning. Of course, the 800-pound Dumbo in the room for Disney is the CEO succession news that is expected by midweek. Disney chief Bob Iger danced around the issue in his commentary during the conference call with Wall Street analysts. It was notable that Iger made mention of the, quote, healthy competition, end quote, that is emerging between the Parks and Experiences side and the studio side for the bragging rights as the company's #1 profit center. However, he also discussed the Disney flywheel, in which the studio side provides the characters and the worlds that people want to visit in the parks, and the parks provide the touch points that make people buy movie tickets to Zootopia 2 and beyond. Much more momentous news to come from Disney later this week. All of these stories and so much more can be found on Variety.com right now. And now it's time for conversations with Variety journalists about news and trends in show business. If it's Monday, we're talking box office with Rebecca Rubin, Variety's box office chief and senior reporter for film and media. Rebecca had a lot to dissect this week. You might have heard something about a documentary about a certain first lady hitting the multiplexes this weekend. And there were more surprises. Rebecca Rubin, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this was a heck of a box office weekend, and, I think it got a lot of attention, even more than around blockbusters. The eyes of certainly the United States were on the box office this weekend, and a documentary from Amazon MGM Studios called Melania. As Rebecca, you have really analyzed these numbers very smartly. How would you assess the performance of Melania?
It's definitely an interesting one to take a look at because this movie opened in third place at the domestic box office with roughly $7 million. And on one hand, that is a huge start for a documentary. It's pretty rare that a documentary is even hitting the $1 million mark or getting to 7 million by the end of its run. So starting with that is quite significant. On the other hand, most documentaries do not have the spend that Amazon MGM, which is behind this film, put into a movie. And so Amazon has acquired the documentary for $40 million, and then they committed another $35 million marketing the film. That is a huge, huge amount of money for a documentary because, again, it's just not a type of film that is typically driving people to theaters to justify that kind of cost. And so, while I don't think that Melania is in danger of turning a profit for them theatrically, because the expectation is that this movie is going to be front-loaded and we might see a big drop in subsequent weekends, I think Amazon MGM might have other reasons for wanting to invest in this. People might be morbidly curious to watch it when it goes on streaming. They might not have wanted to go to theaters, but if it's free and they already subscribe to Amazon Prime, that viewership might be significant. And then there's, of course, speculation politically about why Amazon might have wanted to do this.
Right, exactly. Variety and most other outlets that cover the business of film and media have weighed in on that. The larger aura of this film has been much discussed, and including in a super sharp column by our great colleague Dan Daddario. So let me ask you, because again, you really did a dive into this movie. Who turned out for Melania, and where did they turn out?
Older white women were actually the driving force behind the opening weekend for Melania. According to the post-track data, 72% of audiences were female, 83% were over the age of 45, and then roughly 75% were white. When it comes to the age and when it comes to older females, really significant because more and more we're seeing that the box office is driven by younger men. If you look at the number 1 and 2 movies at the domestic box office this weekend, the number 1 movie was director Sam Raimi's survival thriller Send Help. And then number 2 was this indie film from a YouTube creator called Iron Lung. That's what the movie's called. And both of those movies were overwhelmingly males under the age of 25. And so you can kind of see older demos, they have a reputation of not coming out on opening weekend. And so the fact that they were able to get this demo out is definitely notable.
There are some interesting signs here. You've written a specific story about the Melania audience that I'd encourage people to go to Variety.com and read. But it is interesting that you can motivate that audience, and that audience, especially for art house films, like that is an important movie-going audience. Focus Features has a big documentary in the pipeline, the AI doc, or How I Became an Apocalyptimist. You kind of wonder, maybe not $35 million, but if they put a few more shekels than normal into marketing, could you get a concerned audience, people that are, everybody's talking about AI at a time when people are saying nobody's going to documentaries in the theaters anymore. This shows that is not the case if you can motivate them.
And then in terms of just the parts of the country, traditionally for most big studio releases, Los Angeles and New York City are the top movie-going markets, and a lot of the theaters on the coast are the biggest earning venues. In the case of Melania, it was probably unsurprisingly the opposite. It performed best in rural areas and more Republican-leaning cities. The top markets were Dallas, Orlando, Tampa, Phoenix, West Palm Beach, and the top earning theater was a Cinemark venue in West Palm Beach, which of course is not too far from Mar-a-Lago. So it's not totally surprising that was the sector of the country that was coming out for it. But it is an underserved demographic, apparently, that will go to theaters if they feel like there's a film that is speaking to them.
For sure. Nothing used to succeed on pay cable like either, a total bomb or some movie that had so much notoriety around it. And while, again, by docu standards, Melania is not a bomb, it has had a ton of notoriety, so it will undoubtedly be the kind of thing that people do check out on Amazon Prime Video whenever it comes. It'll be interesting to see how long Amazon keeps it in the theater, especially if next weekend is a pretty precipitous drop. Let's talk about Send Help. Sam Raimi, who is a well-established name in the horror genre, he topped the box office with Send Help. Was this tracking to be strong like this, or was this performance a surprise to you, Rebecca?
So Send Help did end up overperforming expectations. It opened to $20 million, and heading into the weekend, estimates were around $14 to $17 million. That being said, I'm not totally surprised that it ended up overperforming, because word of mouth was so strong, reviews were really good, and we've just seen a lot of support for original horror film. And like you said, Sam Raimi is a director that people definitely know. He's best known for the Tobey Maguire-led Spider-Man trilogy, but he really does have roots in horror with the Evil Dead franchise, Drag Me to Hell. Those are quite popular movies among the horror-loving demographic. And So the word of mouth, I think, helped the film a lot. It got a B+ grade on CinemaScore exit polls, and it has a 93% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is pretty impressive because horror is kind of known for having poor audience scores and not so great reviews from critics. And while that doesn't necessarily stop people from going to theaters, it's pretty significant that this does have such great sentiment behind it.
It just feels like, as in our conversations, that the importance of the director brand has probably never been more significant in turning people out for box office.
I think so, because right now quality has been a really big factor. And when people are wanting to go to theaters, they want to make sure that they're seeing something that is going to be worthwhile. And the director, of course, is the one who is shaping the experience. And when audiences have come to trust a director, there's a little bit more of a feeling like, okay, if Christopher Nolan or Ryan Coogler is directing something, we know we're going to have a good time.
Absolutely. We saw that happen with social media over the last 10, 15 years with showrunners have really, in television, really developed a brand and a following that is significant in moving the needle. Was there anything interesting about the demographics? I'm guessing that was a more young adult turnout for that movie.
Yeah, exactly. The key audience for that was younger men. The opening weekend audience was 53% male, and then also 53% between the ages of 18 to 34. And so they really narrowed into that key demo, and that's who showed up.
Now, on the other end of the spectrum of the film world, a true independent release, Iron Lung, from a very popular YouTuber. Tell us about how this movie got to theaters and how it performed. It certainly seemed to surprise.
This is another very interesting release. Just in general, it's a quite unique weekend at the box office in late January, which tends to be a much quieter time. And so it's interesting to see different distributors getting creative. And in this sense, this is a very successful YouTuber, and Iron Lung opened in second place with $17.8 million from over 3,000 theaters. And what's really notable here is that the YouTube creator's name is Mark Fishback, and he wrote, directed, financed, and distributed this movie. And it almost made as much as a major release from Disney. And so it's showing that his audience, he has over 73 million followers across digital platforms. He is incentivizing them to go to theaters, and they actually showed up. And there is an expectation as well that this film might be front loaded, that the people who are going to see it came out opening weekend, and we might see a big drop in its second weekend, but it is already a big success. Even if it left theaters this weekend, it would have made a ton of money because it reportedly has a $3 million budget. And so all around, it's a piece of good news for theaters who have this release that feels like it came out of nowhere and really brought audiences into theaters.
Again, back to that same thing, like, they will come if motivated. I am so curious to dive into, like, did he call up Adam Aaron himself and say, hey, let's talk business? Or I'm guessing at the stage that he is as a YouTuber, he probably does have some representation, but there's a good business story behind that. Rebecca, thank you as always for watching the numbers and watching the turnstiles. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. This week, Variety will publish 3 more digital dailies out of the International Film Festival in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Closer to home, Variety's Jazz Tanke will be at the Santa Barbara Film Festival on February 7th to hand out the Variety Artisans Kudos, recognizing below-the-line stars in a host of key filmmaking disciplines. For all of the Love is Blind fanatics in your life, don't bother them on February 11th. That's the day that Season 10 of The Dating Show begins its 12-episode run on Netflix. And back to last night's Grammy Awards, don't miss my great colleague Clayton Davis's column on what Bad Bunny's big win means for Latinos at this hard moment for our country. It needs to be said, and Clayton does a great job of spelling it out. Before we go, congrats to Cameron Tang. He's been promoted to Senior Vice President and Head of Development and Current Series for Adult Swim. In his role, Tang will continue to be responsible for the development of all Adult Swim programming. He's been toiling at Adult Swim since 2012. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Rebecca Rubin. Stick, snakes, hick, picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and please tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety. And don't forget to tell us what you think at podcasts@variety.com. Thanks.